Hello and welcome to another episode of the WonkyCast. On this week's show, we had the opportunity to talk to author Jim Butcher, author of the Dresden Files and the Codex Alera series. He tells us all about the origins of some of the books and potentially a little bit of juicy information about the possible future of the Dresden Files TV series. Just before we get on to that, just an update on our movements over the next couple of weeks. If you're around and about in London over this weekend, Helen Arney has put together a series of movie screenings with additional commentary. So she's got scientists and comedians in to come and provide some commentary and some insights into some classic sci-fi films such as Alien and Terminator 2 and a couple of other films. So I will stick a link in the show notes to all the details about that. May Bank Holiday weekend, we will be down in London for the MCM Expo as usual, so hopefully we'll see you all around and about there. We're then heading straight from London across to Bristol, where we're going to be helping out at Lawgiver Mark II, which is the annual Judge Dredd convention. We'll be there doing some of the panels and the moderation there, so get yourselves along there if you're a Dredd fan. In the meanwhile, please kick back and enjoy the interview with Jim Butcher.
Big fucking gun!
All right.
If I'm correct in what I heard in the panel earlier today, this is your first time over here doing a con?
Yes.
How are you finding it? How does this kind of stack up against the big American cons?
This would be at the smaller end of the conventions I do in the U.S., although not the smallest. Lately, I mean, most of the conventions I've been doing are things like Comic-Con and Dragon Con, where there's 75,000 people around or 150,000 people around. But I'm enjoying it here. I mean, it's a smaller convention, but that's nice. You can sit and talk with people, and you can get a lot more of that kind of thing done than you can get at a large convention, where basically you just got to run and hide as soon as you're done. Otherwise, you'd be bombarded with people.
Well, tell me, do you have to just basically go and hide backstage? You can't go out and kind of get mobbed by people.
It's a little bit different at Comic-Con. At Comic-Con, I can blend. There's so many people there, and I'm not really famous at Comic-Con because they've got like all the TV people there.
Yeah, so it's all the people they see rather than
right.
That they read.
And so I can vanish into the crowd, and hardly anyone will recognize me. I might get pulled over once or twice. Are you Jim Butcher? And no, it's
just an excellent cosplay.
Yes, no. What are you talking about? But I haven't gotten to the point where I've got to show up on the floor in a Spider-Man costume or something in order to walk around. So
now I'm a massive gaming nerd as well. It sounds from listening to you talk today, it sounds like that's kind of where your love of things like this came from.
Yeah, I had to not start telling gaming stories in the gaming panel. So
No such thing here.
Exactly.
I want to hear stories about gaming panels.
Oh, okay. Well.
I was a role player from when I was 9. That's when
right.
I started D&D at 9. And I was kind of inviting all the other kids on the street round on a Saturday morning to go, come and play this game. It's awesome.
Right. Oh yeah. I was one of about a dozen nerds in my high school who would admit to playing D&D. So. But I had to play it on the down low because my mom was real down on it, so she didn't want me playing it. So. I have to sneak off and play it at other kids' houses and tell her we were doing something else. Video games were a great excuse for that, So
it was seen as a very, very bad influence on children.
Oh yeah, if you didn't actually ever play the game or know anything about it, and everything you knew about D&D came from a pamphlet that was written, by the Jack the Chick Foundation, and that was my mom's source of information. So.
Yeah, did you see there was one of Tom Hanks' very early movies called Mazes and Monsters.
Oh, yes. Yes, I remember that.
The demons of role-playing.
Yes.
They drive you mad, you'll think you can fly and stab all your friends.
Yeah, if D&D makes you stab all your friends, if that's the nudge that pushes you over the edge, you were standing pretty close to it anyway.
So what was it that kind of drove you into the writing? Was that what kind of sparked that off?
Well, that, and I actually had my mom. My mom actually made me get rid of or burn my fantasy book collection. Those satanic Piers Anthony novels, you know.
Is that the Xanth series?
Yes, exactly,
Yeah.
the Xanth series. Which, I mean, don't get me wrong. I mean, some of those puns really called for those books to be burned anyway.
Yeah, they did.
But I think it was at that point it was inevitable that I would I would write them in the future. You know, so.
Cool. And did you kind of come to decide that urban fantasy was what you wanted to do, or did you try other genres first?
Oh yeah, well no, I wanted to write swords and horses fantasy. That's what I was going to do. I mean, that was the plan. And I didn't write anything else until my writing teacher started suggesting maybe you should try a few other things. And so I tried this X-Files-y riff-off sort of book, and it was awful. Like the other books I'd written had been awful up to that point. And then at one point she asked me if I was, I'd been fighting her for semesters and semesters on what she was trying to teach me because I knew better. I was about 25 at the time, and I knew more than anybody about writing. And after all, I did have a degree in English literature, with an emphasis in creative writing, whereas she had merely published 40 novels. So what did she know? And I decided one year that I was going to prove to her how wrong she was about everything she was trying to teach me. And the device I chose to use to do this was that I was just going to do everything she told me to do. And I was going to fill out her worksheets and do her little wooden character creation stuff, and use all her little story structure things and her stupid story structure for finales, and then she would see what total utter cookie cutter pablum crap resulted from that kind of rigid process and thinking. And so I wrote the first book, the Dresden Files, which clearly demonstrated to her exactly how wrong she was. And from then on, I started thinking less and less about how intelligent I was, and a little bit more and more about maybe I should listen to people who have been there and done that. And so that was when my career actually started going somewhere. I actually sold some books and sold a second series and got going. But I had a lot to unlearn first. So.
You had a plan for the Dresden Files, but was there any particular characters that have developed well and has come out more than you anticipated?
Oh, Butters, absolutely. Butters was a one-shot character that I needed for some light comic relief while they were doing this really hideous corpse examining scene, where they were going to work out exactly how badly this corpse had been messed up before the person had been killed. And I needed somebody to add a little bit of levity to that, because I didn't want to just throw grim. It's got to be grim, joke, grim, and otherwise people get depressed. So initially he was meant to just be that one-off character, and then he was funny enough that I wanted to use him again in the next book for another scene, so he showed up for another scene in the next book. And then the book after that was the book where Harry goes up against a bunch of Games Workshop necromancers, and I was trying to think who's the perfect sidekick for this. For Harry's going up against necromancers, the medical examiner, because not only is he thematically appropriate, but he won't be any actual help at all to Harry the entire time. But he will be somebody who's new to all this, and so Harry will have to explain things to him along the way. And that makes him ideal for purposes of storytelling, because this was going to be the first hardback novel that I had, so it was going to be the point where a lot of people kind of jumped into the Dresden Files, and I wanted to be able to make sure that I could explain that world to somebody who'd never picked up a book before very well with book 7. So, and after that, there was kind of no stopping him. After that, Butters did wind up to be helpful and brave by the end of the book, and set him up for future things which are now coming true, and now he's a Jedi Knight. So.
Because he's also a check for Harry as well. He tries and wanders around and makes sure he's okay.
He does. Yeah, he's been kind of Harry's nagging little. He's been the naggy doctor. He's been Bones. To the Dresden Files crew for a while now, so. But yes, so Butters was somebody who shocked me in terms of the character who sort of introduced himself and then said, no, really, I'm awesome enough that you need to write me into the books. I'm okay.
You just sunk in.
And now he's getting to be every nerd's, and every nerd's fantasy hero. He's got a lightsaber.
That's brilliant.
So he's been a great deal of fun.
Yes, my friends have said that they want more Thomas. Says that Thomas hasn't shown up for a while.
They're right. Actually, Thomas is in the first sentence of the next book. So the next book will be largely concerned with Thomas. So.
When's that due out?
I'll have to finish writing it first.
Oh, okay.
Unfortunately, there's not too much more than that sentence, but that's okay. It's underway. It'll get done in time. I think it's due September something. So I'll have it turned in by this fall.
What was the kind of decision process behind setting it in Chicago?
My writing teacher wouldn't allow me to set it in Kansas City,
Okay.
which is my hometown and where I initially set the books. And she said, Jim, you're already walking close enough to Laurel Hamilton's toes that you don't need to set your story in Missouri as well. I'm like, where else do I set it? She says, it doesn't matter. Somewhere else, anywhere else, just not Missouri. There was a globe on her desk. On the globe, 4 American cities were marked. I didn't want to use New York because the superheroes have New York all sewn up. I didn't want to use D.C. because if you use D.C., you've got to write politics, and that's going to lose you half your audience or more. I didn't want to write Los Angeles because I didn't want to have to learn things about Los Angeles. So the remaining city on the map was Chicago. I said, how's Chicago? She says, fine, Chicago, whatever, just not Missouri. And that was the decision process that led me to Chicago.
It did mean that you could bring Sue into the books.
That wasn't until later, though. I mean,
Yeah.
and that was after I'd already written the books, and was watching a History Channel show about Sue, and I just watched it with my mouth open. I think I was currently writing Stormfront when I saw this show, and it's like, oh, I've got to use this. And saved it up. For like 5 years I waited to write that scene. Finally got to write it. It's like, oh.
Harry and a larger dinosaur.
Delayed gratification fulfilled. So awesome.
Have you come across the game Watch Dogs on the PS4 yet?
I have not.
Because it's kind of hacker game and it's set in Chicago.
Okay.
It's quite cool. I think I've only been there for 6 hours.
Yes.
When I went there to try and find the massive shiny thing that's the coffee bean.
Well, it's a PlayStation, so I haven't played it.
Ah.
I'm an Xbox sort of person. So.
Right.
Well, actually, I'm a PC gamer, but my son got me addicted to Halo. So Halo was a good enough game that I needed to learn how to use the little controllers, and finally did. And basically just followed him around and shot the occasional monster off his back.
I was very much a PC gamer to begin with, kind of a bit of a retro gamer. What sort of stuff are you playing at the moment?
Right now, I'm really into League of Legends online.
Yes.
And I'm getting to the point now where I can finally start playing it as kind of a chess game, where I can start predicting what the other guy's going to do, and then have to have my own counter lined up for him. And if I can think ahead of him, then I'll win, and if not, then I won't. But I'm finally getting to where I can keep up with the kids, because my son is a ridiculously skilled player, and so I'm finally getting to the point where I can play on his team and not just be an endless drag on the team, and occasionally even cover his back when the game turns against him. So that's a nice feeling.
So you did the Codex Alera books as well.
Yes.
So that comes from very much more a fantasy.
Oh yes.
Section.
Much more swords and horses fantasy, yeah.
Which is, you finally got to do it in the end.
Yes.
How was writing those books?
A lot of fun. The great thing about the Alera books is that by the time I get done with a Harry Dresden book, I'm just ready to murder Harry Dresden. I get so sick of that guy. A reader will read him and will hang out with Harry for a couple of days or a week. But I've got to put up with him for months on end, and I've got to put up with him doing all kinds of obstreperous nonsense that I have to rewrite and fix. So by the time I get done with the Dresden book, I'm so ready to be rid of that guy, and it's so nice to be able to. It was so nice to be able to go over to Alera, where they had a completely different set of problems, and where I could tell the story in so many different ways because I had all these different point of view characters I could skip between, and I could use the various points of view to my advantage as a storyteller, or perhaps it was just extra rope with which to hang myself if it didn't work out the way I wanted it to. And then by the time I get finished with Alera, I'll be like, I am so sick of this place and all these different viewpoints, and I'm keeping track of everything and who knows what and who doesn't. I'm losing my mind. Thank God, back in the saddle with Harry Dresden, where he's just got his one point of view, and I can only tell the story, just from seeing, from behind his eyes. Yay!
Blow stuff up.
And yeah, I'll go blow some stuff up and burn some things down, and we'll have a good time. But yeah, I mean, you can only watch. You can only watch Schindler's List so many times before you need to see a Michael Bay movie and have things explode. So, oh, good. Back to the Dresden Files.
You told an interesting story at the panel earlier. If you don't mind repeating it, is how you came to write the Codex Alera series.
Initially, the Codex Alera was born. I wrote it on a bet. I wish I could say it was a brilliant inspiration, but what it really was an argument on the internet. It was one of those. It was one of those arguments that it was happening on the Del Rey Online Writers Workshop, and where there was a bunch of us aspiring writers on there, and we would critique each other's work. We would talk about theory about the craft of storytelling, and it was one of those discussions that when you saw it in the thread, you would just immediately hit reply and then caps lock and start talking and then start typing because it was flame war time. And the flame war was going back and forth between the two sides, and I was a champion on one side, and there was another guy who was a champion on the other. And my side was this, or his side had the idea that what you really needed to tell a good story was a holy idea, capital H, capital I. And that if you had a sufficiently good idea, it didn't matter how badly you told the story, that idea would carry the story through. And the idea that they listed as an example was Jurassic Park. This idea is so strong, cloned dinosaurs. You can't mess with it. It doesn't matter how badly you write it. You're not going to be able to screw this one up to where people won't like the idea. And the other side, and the side that I was championing was the side that held out that it was the writer's presentation that mattered more than anything else. That it didn't matter if you had an old, worn-out idea. That if you were a good writer, if you could tell a good story, if you could put your own original spin on the presentation of that story, that you would be able to tell it successfully and entertain the reader. And our example was, how many versions of Romeo and Juliet have we seen, and yet we still keep making more of them. Mm-hmm. So that discussion went back and forth for a while, and it was the all caps discussion. And finally, this guy on the other side says, why don't you put your money where your mouth is? Why don't you write, why don't you let me give you a bad idea and see you write a saleable property out of it? And because it was the internet, and because I was because I was in my 20s, I looked back at him and said, no, why don't you give me 2 bad ideas and I'll use them both? And so the guy says, all right, first bad idea is Lost Roman Legions. I'm so sick of all the Lost Roman Legions. All the Lost Roman Legions should have been found by now. So Lost Roman Legion is your first bad idea. I'm like, okay, what's the second one? He says, Pokemon. I am so tired of Pokemon. I'm so tired of putting up with Pokemon. So I went out and started researching and found out that Roman legions at the time, when you talk about Lost Roman Legions, everybody means the 9th Hibernian Legion. And that legion was made up of about half Roman citizens, about half German mercenaries. And I thought to myself, okay, what if instead of marching off into enemy territory and being destroyed, they had marched off into a thunderstorm and vanished? And where do they go? They go to the land of the Pokemon. So I put my Roman legion in the land of the Pokemon, and Pokemon itself is a conflation of 2 ideas. The first being the idea of kami from the Shinto religion, that every natural object is inhabited by a spirit. So a tree has a kami, a pool has a kami, a mountain has a kami, and you should respect these kami. They're very powerful, and even a pebble has a kami, and you should respect that one as well. But if you don't, what's going to happen? It's a pebble. And they took this idea of kami, and then they added it to professional wrestling, and that's where we get Pokemon. So I said, okay, well let's use this, and I've got to have a good name for him, because we're gonna have to hang everything from the name. And just then in the background, Big Trouble in Little China was on, and in the background, one of the old Chinese actors says, "All motion in the universe is caused by tension between positive and negative furies." And I went, "Ooh, furies! It's even Greco-Roman. I can use that." And so I called these kami. I called them furies, and I dropped my Lost Roman Legion off in the land of the Pokemon, and I gave them a couple thousand years to ferment and create the society, and then I started telling my story from there. And I eventually went back to the guy online and said, I'm not going to post it here, because at the time we still weren't sure how the internet was going to interact with copyright law, and how posting on things on the internet would, how heavily they would be regarded as published or not. So I said, I'm not going to put it up here. I think I can actually sell this. And he's like, "Oh, so in other words, I'm right." And I'm like, "Yeah, dude, whatever, you're right." And so he won the argument, and I got a 6-book deal.
Excellent.
You've got a new series coming out soon.
I do. It's a steampunk series. I wanted to call it Steam Opera, but my editor informed me that, "Jim, you can't just go making up genres." And I was, in a very offended tone, I wanted to ask why not. But she assures me I can't. So this book, I like to say it's originally I would say that it was X-Men meets Hornblower, except I wanted to sound more steampunky, so now I say it's Extraordinary Gentleman meets Hornblower. And the series is called The Cinder Spires. The first book is called The Aeronauts Windlass, and it will be out in September of this year. I think September 29th. And it's the longest book I've ever written. Checking in at close to 200,000 words, so it'll be a big old doorstop of a book. As far as pacing goes, it's set in a time frame much more similar to the Dresden Files than to the Alera books. But it's also a multiple person point of view story being told from the point of view of many of the different characters. And I would like to tell you that it's going to be popular because it's got fun characters, or because it's got a good plot, or because it's got a world that's enjoyable. But at the end of the day, it's going to be popular because there's talking cats, and talking cats are going to sell that, and they're going to make it go, and they're just so tremendously fun to write. And all of my beta readers that are reading it, they're like, "I can't believe that you don't have cats, because you write them just so brilliantly." And it's like, well, I don't really know cats so much, but I know people who have cats. So, I can write a story for those people, with these cats, and they're so much fun to write. They're such horrible little bullies. They kind of live alongside human society in this world, and you sort of have to respect the cats, because they have opposable thumbs and matches. So if they get upset with you, they can do awful things to you, and given their egos, they're perfectly willing to. The cat will show up and be like, "I noticed that this warehouse is rodent-free. Perhaps you would like it to continue to be rodent-free. Perhaps there will be cream waiting for us this week at 3 p.m. So you kind of got a little furry mafia running around. But the cats, they speak their own language. They speak cat, and they understand English, except when they don't. And they just sort of generally are just the most egotistical, awful little people, and yet they're cats, so they get away with it. And there's a cat who owns a human being who keeps a human as a pet and has taught her to speak cat. And her ability to speak to cats is what makes her of interest to the local monarch of her spire. The world of the Cinder Spires. The surface is a very, very dangerous place to live. It's like living in a war zone, so hardly anyone lives there. Humanity sort of dwells within these enormous black stone towers of nearly indestructible stone called the spires. And all trade, all commerce, all travel is done via airship between these spires. So when the Spire Ark, or the local monarch of her spire, sees that his spire is about to get into a war with another very powerful spire, and so he recruits a team that he might need to do to get things accomplished, sort of his own personal mission squad. And one of the people he recruits is this girl Bridget who knows how to talk to cats because a cat has adopted her. And so she's so that, and since cats are everywhere and they're very quiet and they see and hear everything, they actually have all kinds of information, and they're extremely valuable allies and extremely dangerous enemies to be made. So it's and the Spire Arc is clever enough to know, to understand the implications of that. So he recruits for as part of his team a girl who can actually speak to cats and go and extend his diplomatic overtures towards them. He recruits a down on his luck privateer, who was a very, very skilled privateer, but actually happened to anger the wrong people in the enemy spire and have to confront this they sent a horribly powerful warship to confront him, and he barely got out of it with his hide intact and his ship all damaged, and beyond his ability to repair it. And so the Spire Arcus tells him, well, if you'll work for me, then I will fix your ship. And that's the one thing that the captain, no matter how independently minded he may be, that's the one thing the captain of a ship can't say no to. It's like, oh, you're going to give me my ship back. Now I've got to do it. And so basically we've got a pirate and the girl who talks to cats and a princess. There's wizards in this world, although they're called etherealists. And etherealists they work with an energy that exists in this world called etheric energy, and they're all quite mad. The only question is if they're harmlessly, I'm a little bit weird mad, or if they're the smiling and in perfectly calm, polite voices inviting you to tea mad. At which point you get hacked up with an axe or something even more horrible. We've got an etherealist and etherealist apprentices on the team, and they're both just dotty as hell, and I love riding them. And just sort of generally speaking, there's this war that's gearing up between these two spires, and these people are cast into the middle of it, and they have to find a way. They have to find ways to work together and to trust each other and to generally perform like a team. So it's the first episode of X-Men. Is really what I'm writing here. So. I had a great deal of fun writing, and I got a very strong response from my beta readers, stronger than even I get from Dresden Files stuff. And I had a lot of fun, and hopefully the readers will have a lot of fun too. I mean, it's I call it steampunk. It's probably not steampunk in its purest form, as it isn't set in Victorian London, which I think is the setting for most awesome steampunk.
Not all. There is no kind of proper steampunk.
Yes. You say that, but there are proper steampunk people who would totally disagree.
That's very true. There's very vocal people who would disagree with you.
Yes, exactly. But that's the flavor I want to give it. Is we've got a society that is a very mannered society, and it has to be, because they're kind of kept in these fairly small places where you have to live very closely with your neighbors. So that kind of restraint is very important to their society, and yet I'm going to get to throw them into these horrible situations, but we've got there's wizards and intelligent ships and warrior monks and all kinds of fun stuff. That is stuff that I love reading about, and it's like, oh, I've got to write some naval style combat fiction, because I just love that stuff, and so I've been having a very good time doing that.
Awesome. We've got time for one more before we finish up. You got anything? Any other questions? No. Well, I was going to say, have you got any other any other projects in the wings in terms of like either TV or games? Because obviously there was the Dresden Files TV show.
Yes.
Is there any chance of that ever being resurrected or doing a new version of it? Or
right now, the television rights to the Dresden Files have been optioned out. I'm not allowed to say with who. Okay. In my perfect world, we would see the Dresden Files reappear as something that was as a feature production series. In my absolute perfect world, it's Netflix that takes it on, because Netflix has got the money to be able to invest in it in a really good show. Absolutely. And they've kind of got the scope to be patient and let a show gather its audience before they decide whether or not they're gonna cancel it. So much of TV today is driven by, well, can you survive the first season?
Absolutely.
And
it's very fickle.
It is. It's very fickle, and it doesn't give you a lot of time to build something really cool. And building something really cool does not happen instantly. It's really hard. It's really hard to pull that off, and especially in TV when you're telling a serialized type story, you want time for the audience to gather and to be able to anticipate and to be able to see all the different parts of the world, so that when shocking things happen, they can tell that it's different enough from the norm that they should be shocked by this. You know, oh my God, Angel just killed Miss Calendar. You know, I mean that was a big deal because it had been built up for so long.
I guess the Netflix model is it's either a really good thing or a really bad thing. That they'll produce a show and then they'll release the whole of it in a season on a day, which can either be really good or really bad depending on how you view it. No, but some shows do.
Oh, I admire it actually. I mean, one of the fun things that the whole Netflix phenomenon lets you do is go back and find shows that you haven't seen before and just binge on them and go, oh my gosh, the Doctor Who is actually kind of nifty, you know.
I think Breaking Bad actually said it was because of Netflix that we ended up so big, that it was a very slow burner. It increased the audience as time went on, and then people went back to the start and had the ability to watch it. Right,
and to see where it all came from.
Which then got people to watch the TV show once they caught up.
Right.
So that's without that, they don't think it would have ever been so big.
I think we'll. If you had seen Babylon 5, if it had been released today instead of in the '90s, that you would have a similar reaction to it, because the strength of that show was in the duration of its building. The ongoing story was really what made it.
Dresden's very much about an ongoing story arc, and you've got the initial kind of let's blow things up, and you've got all these interesting things. There's a hook. But then it's all about the progression of the character. Yeah,
as Harry, becomes more and learns more and gets to be, he's heading Gandalf words, but learning to be a wizard is something that takes a long time, and learning all these valuable lessons, or painful lessons, as the case may be, is something that I don't think an audience would really give it credit if they didn't go through it with him and see, okay, well, this is how you end up, this is how you end up with that kind of personality as a wizard, of the subtle and sudden sort of wizard, and which is what Harry has been sort of growing toward. But yet it was fun to write the young hothead wizard who was just quick to anger. There was no subtlety there at all, and that was all kinds of fun to write. But we're showing the character growing. If you don't do that, then you start losing people. People start, if you just get caught in that same cycle of the same action over and over. It's not nearly as compelling.
So it'd be quite important to have that as part of a TV show.
Oh yes.
Rather than.
Yeah, and I think that was one of the things about the Dresden in the series that came out on Sci-Fi was that he was in many ways already that more mature person, and you've got to start him somewhere different than where he ends up, and all your characters need to start somewhere different than where they end up.
Lovely. Okay, well, thank you very much for your time, sir.
Thank you very much.
Pleasure talking to you.
Big fucking gun!